Chapter 30 of The Red Runners. This is a LibriVox recording. All LibriVox recordings are in the public domain. For more information or to volunteer, please visit LibriVox.org. Recording by Simona Perego. The Red Runners by Seckatary Hawkins. Harkinson's last visit. A few days passed in peace. Our meetings were held every day after school without anything unusual about them. It was freezing weather, and the snow lay white and cold with an icy crust upon it. The river was frozen over from bank to bank. Shadow Loomis and Robbie Hood had not shown up for many days, and still Rolling Stones John used our clubhouse for a hotel. None of the boys kicked about that. I don't know whether it was because he was Shadow's brother or whether it was because they like John Loomis himself, but anyway they let him alone. The boys would all speak to him as they came in, and he would answer them usually with just one word, howdy. Then he would mind his own business and our boys would go about theirs. Now, on Thursday afternoon, just after our meeting, I stayed inside, while the other boys went out to skate. While I stood by the front window watching the fellow cutting fancy figures on the frozen river, my gaze happened to wander over toward Pelman, and I was surprised to see a group of Pelman fellows coming across the ice. Fine, I said to myself. Pelham is going to pay us a visit. I had not seen or heard from Briggen and his gang for so long that I was almost about to forget them. I settled myself in my chair at my desk and waited for the knock on the door. It came, and when I called "Come in," the door opened quickly, and Briggen entered, followed by Dave Borth and Ham Gardner. "Hawkins," began Briggen. "It's up to us boys to tend to those Red Runners. It's about time we stopped their foolishness." "You've got my permission to go ahead, Briggen," I answered. "What's going to stop you?" "Come on," said Briggen peevishly. "You know what I mean. You fellas and us fellas together must stop them. Separate, we can do nothing. We all go to work together." "We have been working for a long time," I said. "We are not worried, Briggen." "Yeah, but now it's different. Used to be when they only came down here once in a while, and most times they was after you guys, not us. But now it's different, Hawkins. They are too near us Pelham folks to be pleasing." "You mean—" "I mean," said Briggen, "that Harkinson has split with Long Tom. I knew it all along, Hawkins. They can't be two leaders to any gang like that, and you know it. You know Long Tom was boss after Stoner, and you know Harkinson has a way of being boss himself." "Ah," I said, "Harkinson has broken away from Long Tom, Briggen? Is that what you mean, Briggen? Harkinson has set up a gang of his own?" "You got it," said Briggen, "and the worst of it is that Harkinson has set up his headquarters in his neighborhood, so close to us Pelhams. I tell ya, Hawkins, it can't be allowed. He set himself a headquarters over in Barnes Field. He's got a good lot of redcoats with him. There's a lot that didn't care for Long Tom. And they dug themselves out a neat cave in the ground. You'll never find it, but ask Ham here. Cross my heart and double-cross it," broke in Ham Gardner in low voice. "They've done all that. Briggen is right. It was me as found it, Hawkins. I seen Harkinson's spooky eyes. They got me baffled. Every time I see them I feel like—" "I know him," I said. "I've met Harkinson, and look into those hypnotizing peepers of his. You shouldn't let this thing frighten you as it does. Boys, I thank you for bringing me the news. If we can help you out at any time, call on us. We are with you for putting an end to the Red Runners." "I say, Hawkins," broke in Dave Borth, "aren't they the slickest bunch you ever saw, Toad? I'll be judged if I ever saw." "Remember Stoner's boy, Dave," I said. "The Red Runners have nothing on him. They're not half as clever. We will put them down and out for the count before long. We might need you boys to help us, Toad. Go back and take my advice, fellas. Stay away from Barnes Field. You don't have to tell me, said Humgarder, and I left the clubhouse just as the Rolling Stone came back from a walk through the woods. He was eating an apple and carrying another. Who's them birds? He asked, jerking his thumb towards the Pelhams. Oh, those boys, I said. They are our neighbors across the river. He grounded something and went on his place beside the stove. I went to work writing down the day's doings in my book. I stayed down at the clubhouse longer than usual that evening. I heard all the other fellows shouting so long as they ran up the river path with their skates rattling on a strap. I had got a late start writing and I wanted to finish up because Lew Hunter was not coming down to the clubhouse in the evening, and when he didn't come, I didn't either. I like Lew's music and singing practice. If there isn't any singing, I'd just as soon stay home. So there I was alone in my office, with only Rolling Stone loomis out in the front room by the stove. Once I looked out of my window. It seemed to think something had flashed past the window pane. But I saw nothing. I noticed that it had become dark outside, which I had not noticed before because I had had my lamp lit since meeting time. I went again to my writing. Once again I turned my eyes to the windows at my left. Surely something had been at that pane of glass. Else why had my attention been drawn that way? Ah! There it was. I knew the reason now. Harkinson's steely eyes. They were not drawn away this time. Steadily they gleamed at me through the frosty window pane. Then it seemed as if the steely glitter died out of those eyes. Harkinson had lowered a pair of dark-colored spectacles that he had raised while he looked at me. For a moment those dark goggles remained there. Then the face disappeared. Good Lord, I heard, and I turned and saw Rolling Stone Loomis standing behind me. Did you see that, Hawkins? Did you see those eyes? Never in my life did I ever see such eyes look into mine. Excuse me. A harsh, rasping sound came from the front room. I felt the draft from the open door. There stood Harkinson, my old-time enemy, my old hypnotizer himself, in my clubhouse, and behind him, holding him by the arm, was another red rammer, who wore the number 5 on his sleeves. Excuse me, repeated Harkinson in that harsh, rasping voice, a voice I had never heard before. Either Harkinson had suffered a change in his voice, or this was not Harkinson. But I looked again, and I knew it was he. It was Harkinson, yeah, with his new spectacle that made him look like an owl. I even thought I could see that steady glitter behind those dark glasses. I come peaceful, Seckatary Hawkins, he said. I come to talk things over with you in peace. Under the white flag, under a truce, Hawkins. Yeah, I broke in. Say what you got to say, Harkinson. Don't try any of your tricks. No tricks, he cried, and his voice was more rasping than before. No tricks, as I am a Christian, Hawkins. I give you my word. Sit down and we will talk. I shoved 2 chairs out to him and his number 5. They sat facing me. Rolling Stone Loomis stood behind my chair. I broke away, Hawkins, said Harkinson. I broke away from the Red Runners. How come? I interrupted. You still wear the red sweaters with your number 2 on your sleeve, and your pole has number 5. Give me time, cried Harkinson. Hear me out, will you, Hawkins? We broke away, 6 of us. We ain't with Long Tom no more, see? We cut loose, like Lasky did, Hawkins. You know Lasky. We heard what you did with Lasky. I come to you now to say that we ain't gonna have no more to do with Long Tom nor the Red Runners. The sheriff is after me. It's me he wants, Hawkins. More than other 5 that's with me. We thought we was safe when we dug in over there on Barnes Fields. But those Pelham boys told they came today. Never mind how we found out. But I come peaceful, Hawkins. I won't take revenge on Pelham. And I won't bother you fellas no more. You can bet on that. I'll never bother nobody no more. I ain't what I used to be, Hawkins. I've been unlucky. I got to be let alone till I can get somewhere. I got to take a rest. Androwski has gone to fix things for me, and when he comes back to fetch me, I will go away and never come back. Everything will be all right. If the sheriff doesn't know that if you will tell me you won't tip us off, tell me you won't put the sheriff wise till I can get away. I'll make a bargain with you, Hawkins. I can't bargain with you, Harkinson, I said, for I could not understand what the old hypnotizer was driving at. There is no use to go farther, I said. I'll tell you one thing which is only fair and square. I'll not say a thing about you coming over here tonight. That's all. Further than that, you and your pals will have to take care of yourselves. It doesn't matter to me whether you have broken off with Long Tom or not. That's your business. But none of us fellas will forget the things you have done to us. That's all. Now, git, while the getting's good. Both Harkinson and his number 5 rose at once. All right, croaked Harkinson's harsh voice. All right. Oh boy, how those steely eyes glared at me then. He has backed away and raised his dark spectacles for a moment. I moved back a step or two and bumped into the Rolling Stone, who seemed to have been petrified by the look of Harkinson's eyes. You've gonna be sorry, Hawkins, he said. There'll come a day when you'll feel sorry. You had a chance. Get out, I said, stepping up closer to the bully. Get out before I throw you out. He turned to me, his eye flashing through those dark glasses, and for a second I thought he would smash me to the floor for saying that. But suddenly I saw the light go out of his eyes. Yeah, I saw the steely light go out of Parkinson's eyes, and I felt as though I would never be afraid of the hypnotizer again. He stared over my head as though we were listening. His pal stood holding the door open waiting for him. Come on, he called impatiently. And Harkinson, without another word, turned to go. The funny part of it was that while number 5 waited at the open door for him, Harkinson steered for the window on the left. Number 5 jumped and grabbed his arm and pulled him out the door. That's the way they went out together, arm in arm, and the door slammed behind them. I ran to the window on the left. Rolling Stone Loomis sprang on the one at the right. We watched the two runners go down the steps into the ice-crusted snow. I saw number 5 slip and fall. Harkinson, by himself, walked steadily forward, and I saw him bump smack up against a tree. Then number 5 was on his feet again, and caught up with Harkinson. Locking his arm in that of the hypnotizer, he hurried him along, and the shadows of the river bank hid them from our view. We turned back, and I saw the Rolling Stone wipe the perspiration from his forehead. You are not warm, I said. Warm as I ever want to be, he said. You. Never did I see eyes like that fellow had. Scared you, did he, John? Scared me stiff, if I ever was, replied the Rolling Stone. Well, John, I said, you have been face to face with one of the strangest boys you'll never know in your whole life. He was second in line in the Red Runners, and he has had more to do with that bunch of red birds, as you call them, than ever Long Tom himself. He has hypnotizing eyes. Harkinson has... I know it, broke in the Rolling Stone. Don't tell me, Seckatary Hawkins. Good Lord, I felt weak as a cat while he sat there. What's that makes a fella feel so weak? I wish I knew, John, I said, but all I know is that it's Harkinson. The boys all know him. They have his number, the same as you. He's a hypnotizer. Rolling Stone John looked at me for a full minute. Then he whipped his forehead again and said, I guess I'll be moving around pretty soon, Seckatary Hawkins. You fellas been mighty nice to me, but I guess I'd better to be on my way. I'm always on the go. And anyway, I don't like to be around fellas with hypnotizing eyes. My heart won't stand it. No, Siri. Good night. If you are going, I guess I got to sleep here once more. I walked over to him and put my hand on his shoulder. John Loomis, I said, I'm glad I met you. I've had a lot of pleasure knowing you just these few days, but I'd have lots more if you don't do one thing. Say which? He asked, with a careless smile on his tanned face. Go back home, I said. Back where your kid brother is, and the other folks who want you. They won't say they do, John, but they want you all the same. He lifted my hand gently from his shoulder. You are good, Hawkins, he said. I know you are all right, but you don't understand, see? You just let me alone, and I'll get there someday, maybe. Just now I had wanted no place, but here. Just you fellas, you and your fine pulse, Hawkins, want me, and nobody else in the world wants me at all. So if you don't mind... All right, John, I said, and sighed. Good night, Hawkins, old boy, he said. Good night, John. And I put on my cap and buttoned up my coat collar. As I walked up the path to the main road, I could not help thinking of Harkinson and the strange way he acted. I wonder what's wrong with him, I said to myself. I bet we catch him before many days. Which we did. End of chapter 30.
Chapter 31 of The Red Runners. This is a LibriVox recording. All LibriVox recordings are in the public domain. For more information or to volunteer, please visit LibriVox.org. Chapter 31. The Prayer in the Log House. On my way to school next morning, I found Brigham, the Pelham leader, waiting for me at the corner. I gotta tell you something, Hawkins, he said, and he had a worried, frightened look on his face. Us Pelham fellows went spying on Harkinson and his rebels last night. Rebels? I repeated. Yeah, them what broke against Long Tom and went with Harkinson. They got a purty good dugout on Birney's field. We spied on 'em last night, Dave Burns and Ham Gardner and me. I thought Ham was afraid to go near Harkinson, I said. He ain't afraid no more, said Brigham. No used to be afraid no more. Harkinson has turned Christian, the old hypnotizer has. He heard him a-prayin' there in his hole in the ground. It was sad, yes, sir. Hawkins prayin' like he was going to die or something. What? I exclaimed. You're telling me the truth, Brigham? Sure, as I'm standing here, I heard it myself, and Dave heard it, and Ham heard it. And when Ham heard it, he got his nerve back. He wasn't afraid of Harkinson no more. Now, what I wants to know, Hawkins, is what's the matter with Harkinson? Why should he pray to God like he's afraid of some awful thing? And what is it that makes Ham so brave when he used to be so scared of the old hypnotizer? Go back and watch there all day, Brigham, I said. This afternoon, when school is out, I'll come over with some of our boys. Something must be wrong. You better go, and if anything happens, come back and tell me. After school, we held our meeting in the clubhouse, and the boys then went with their sleds and skates to see the new sled track that Jerry Moore and Roy Doble had been bragging about, over on a hill near Doble's farm. I sat alone in my little riding room, while Rolling Stone John sat in his old place by the stove, reading a fairy storybook that used to belong to Frankie Kane. Hawkins! Oh, Sec! Shadow called from outside. I hurried outside and found him on the porch. Hi, Shadow, old boy, I said. What's on your mind? I held the door open. Shadow did not answer me. His gaze went over my head into the clubhouse, where his no-account brother John sat with his feet upon the fender of the stove. But John acted as though he didn't hear a word. Has he been here ever since you met him here, Shadow? I answered. And it seems like he might be here forevermore. I ain't the one to turn him out, you know that. He can sleep in our clubhouse as long as he wants. Shadow waved his hand. Pass him, he said. Let's talk about something else. I've got that ice scooter down here on the river, and you'll be surprised how fine those sails work. There's a stiff wind blowing. Suppose we go for a ride? I've come all the way down on it. Together we walked down to the river bank. The river was still frozen from bank to bank. Beside our ice-locked wharf stood the most beautiful iceboat I ever saw, with sails so arranged that it could quickly be made to catch any wind, forward or backward. While I was telling Shadow how much I admired it, I saw 3 boys running over the ice to us. They shouted to me and waved their hands, and I saw it was Brigham, Dave Burns, and Ham Gardner. Shadow, I said. Don't start any fighting now. I know you got a grudge against Brigand, but this ain't the time to settle it, old boy. All right, said Shadow with a smile, and he turned and walked back a few feet from where I stood. Hawkins, said Brigand, something's doing. 4 red runners went back up the river this morning on skates. Looks like they left old Harkinson in the lurch, gave him the shake. I got you, I said. I got you, Brigand. There's only 2 over there in the hiding place now. No, there ain't none there now, interrupted Brigand. They're all gone. 4 went up and 2 went down the river. Now what do you make out of that? Only 2 went down? You're sure of that, Brigand? Sure as I'm alive. No use me going over to Bernie's field then. You go back to your side, Brigand, and wait. Watch for the others if they come back, you know? Stay on your side, will you? Brigand promised to do what I told him, and the 3 of them went back to their side across the river. I was excited. The very thought of capturing Harkinson made me full of fire. If 4 went up and 2 went down the river, it was a cinch that the 2 were hiding in the log house on the island. Shadow, I said, this is our chance, yours and mine. We can capture the hypnotizer ourselves. Shadow, don't ask me why. I know we can. Will you go? It was like asking Shadow if he would have $1 million. Sure, he'd go. And so we started for the island. I sat myself in that 40-mile-an-hour ice scooter of his, and he gripped the sail ropes, and oh boy, we were off like a flash. How we sailed. It seemed to me as if the wind thought this little ice sailboat was its plaything, for it certainly was sailed along at a lively clip, and it was only that we stopped once when we drew into shore and Shadow motioned for me to be silent. I didn't know what was coming off until I saw about 5 minutes later a single solitary red runner pass us, going upstream on skates. He wore number 5 on his sleeve. Now then, said Shadow, after number 5 had gone around the upper bend, let's go. Go we did, and we didn't stop until we came to the island. What now, Hawkins? Asked Shadow Loomis as we stood before the log house. He's inside, I answered. Harkinson's there, Shadow, all by himself. Shadow hesitated. I wish it were Andrewski, he said, and he bit his lip. Come on, I cried. It's Harkinson. Him with the hypnotizing eyes, Shadow. What better capture could you make? I know, broke in Shadow. You fellows have worked yourselves up into an excitement over Harkinson. When I know Harkinson ain't the one to be afraid of at all. It's Andrewski. Hawkins, he's the one you'll be taking your hat off to when all is said and done. As for this Harkinson, listen, I said sharply. From the longhouse came a whimpering sound, a crooning, crying sound. No, never could I believe that to be the voice of Harkinson. By golly, Shadow, I said. Someone else is in that log house. That's not Harkinson's voice. Listen. Together we listened again. Again came that crooning, that crying. No boy ever cried like that. Oh, God! It came to us over that silent island stillness. Oh, God! Save me from this! Save me from this! Shadow Loomis turned and looked at me, but I could not look him in the face. Something told me. Now, I don't know what it was that told me. I don't want you to ask me what told me, because I don't know. All I know is that something told me that Harkinson was praying to God to save him from something. Have pity on me, O Lord. Save me. Don't let this happen to me, O Lord. Yeah, that's what I heard coming from between those cracks in the logs of that old ramshackle log house. And I want to tell you right here that no matter if it was Harkinson or somebody else, my heart went out to him. Yeah, oh boy, I felt sorry for that fella, whoever he was, who was saying over and over to himself, "Oh Lord, save me from this." For God's sake, Hawkins, said Shadow Loomis. He gripped my arm. For God's sake, Hawkins, he repeated. Then, without another word, he turned and ran from the spot, and I followed him. Yeah, coward-like, I followed Shadow, running as fast as we could, and we did not stop till we pulled up at our secret headquarters, the old houseboat that formerly belonged to the skinny guy, Link Lambert and his pop, in the backwater pool, the lily pond. For half an hour we sat there, silent, never looking at one another. I let myself rest. Believe me, I didn't know what to do. I knew that here was our chance to capture Harkinson, one of the worst Red Runners, one that the sheriff would be glad to get, and yet something about his crying and whimpering and praying in that old log house made me afraid to touch my hand upon it. "Shadow," I said, "we ought to have taken him." "You do it," said Shadow. "I don't want to touch him. I don't want anything to do with the fellow who asked God to have mercy." "No," I said, and then we both were silent. How long we would have sat there in that old reminder of our skinny guy, no one knows. The next thing I remember is Jerry Moore's voice. "That Hawkins footprints, take my word. Nobody but the secretary wears the square toe shoe." Then a full minute of silence. I could barely hear the slush of their feet through the snow. "Ah!" It was Jerry, standing in the doorway of the houseboat. Behind him were Dick Ferris, Lou Hunter, Roy Dobble, Johnny McLaren, Bill Darby, and Perry Stokes. They had skated down the frozen river. "So here you are," continued Jerry. "So here you are. Hawkins, and you, Shadow Loomis? What's the idea, running away from us? Think we couldn't trace the tracks of this homemade ice boat? Listen, what's the game down here? Has Pelham fellas steered you wrong?" "Steered us wrong?" I interrupted. "Steered us wrong? Jerry, you go to the other end of the island, the blockhouse. A Red Runner's there, most likely," said Jerry. "Else you fellows wouldn't have come down. Now listen. Hawkins, if there's a red jacket in that log house, we're gonna smoke him out, see? Makes no difference what you think, no matter if you are a secretary. If it's a Red Runner, he goes to the sheriff. And the calaboose? No soft hearties for me, eh, Dick?" "I'm captain," said Dick, "and if there's a Red Runner hereabouts, he's got to be taken alive to the sheriff." "Alive?" I said. "All right, then. Dick, you lead. We will come with you." Honestly, I didn't think we would take that Red Runner alive. I didn't think it was Harkinson. The voice that Shadow and I heard did not sound like the voice of Harkinson. It had been so changed. I thought then, "Who's in there?" yelled Dick Ferris, as we stood before the log house. No answer. Only the whimpering, only the crooning sound, only that crybaby voice. "Oh God, have mercy! Save me from this! Save me from this!" Dick and Jerry stood and talked together before the log house door. As we waited, there came the sound of metal against the ice. We turned and saw a skating figure leap from the ice to the bank. It was AndiSue. You could not mistake that beak of a nose under which hung a half-moon smile. He held up his hand. He could not talk. AndiSue was silent. We all fell aside. We saw him kick one skate from his foot. The next instant he had sprung to the door, limping on one free foot and one foot that still held the skate. He opened the door of the log house. He stepped inside for a moment, then came out again, and leaning upon his arm was Harkinson, staring straight at us, but the steely glitter was gone from his eyes. "He is blind!" I saw the words form on the lips of AndiSue the Silent. Yeah, I had been trained to watch the lips of AndiSue. Now he was saying the awfulest thing I had ever heard him say in his silent way. That Harkinson the hypnotizer no longer could see. At once I knew what those words meant that we had heard coming from behind the logs of the old stockade. Harkinson was blind. He could no longer use those steely eyes of his. I saw Jerry Moore step forward. I saw Dick Ferris lift his hand. "Seckatary Hawkins," said Dick, "we have captured Harkinson." "I'll have nothing to do with it," I cried. "I'll not touch him. Dick Ferris, not for you nor any of the boys." AndiSue was holding up his hand. I watched his lips. "He cannot see. Allow me to take him back." "Take him back, AndiSue," I said, patting him on the back, "and take care of him." Look here," broke in Jerry Moore. "You think you're mighty smart, Hawkins. But we got a word to say in this. Nobody's going to take this Harkinson back but us, see? And we will take him back to the sheriff, we will. That's where he belongs. What have you got to say to that, AndiSue?" Neither AndiSue nor Harkinson made a sound. Just one moment, a new voice had rung in. A new figure stepped into the half-circle. It was the Rolling Stone, John Loomis. "Fair play," he cried. "Shame on you fellows who don't give fair play. I want to see the first guy who won't let these two redbirds pass the line." How quick Jerry Moore fell back. How quick the others gave room. "This way." It was Shadow's own voice saying that, and leading AndiSue and Harkinson to his own ice scooter. We took them up to our clubhouse. Yeah, Harkinson, blind Harkinson, lay in our clubhouse at last, a prisoner, if you want to call him that, but none of us fellows thought so. No, we wanted him to get his eyesight back, that's all. Makes no difference what he was, or what he did to us. Now he was a blind boy. Something always was wrong with his eyes. That's what Doc Waters said. And it was this that made us always think he was a hypnotizer. It was the Rolling Stone who insisted on taking him to our clubhouse until something could be done for him. And Perry Stokes went and brought Doc Waters down. There, on the Rolling Stone's pallet on the floor beside my desk, we laid him down while Doc Waters looked into his eyes. Those eyes that had often made us shiver when they peeped at us, but now no longer could see. When Doc had finished the examination, AndiSue was gone. None of the boys had seen him go, but AndiSue had only waited until he knew his side partner was safe. Then he had scooted out into his own freedom. He knew the sheriff wanted him, and he was going to let anybody take him prisoner. Doc Waters promised to see that Harkinson was taken care of, and the boys all left, one by one, for their homes. When we were left alone, Doc said to me, "Hawkins, you've known this boy Harkinson for a long time." "Yes, Doc," I said. "Ever since last summer. I met him when I came home from Cuba, and he always had these, what you call, hypnotizing eyes." "Yes, Doc. That's what made us boys so afraid of him." Doc shook his head. "Poor fella," he said. "And he was going blind all the time. I never saw a case like it in my whole life." Rolling Stone John stepped up. "I can look after him a while, Doctor," he said, "if you want to go back." "Yes, yes," said Doc. "You let him stay here until tonight. He must go to the hospital at once. I will see to that. Tonight you boys bring him to my office," which we did. End of chapter 31. Chapter 32 of The Red Runners. This is a LibriVox recording. All LibriVox recordings are in the public domain. For more information or to volunteer, please visit LibriVox.org. Chapter 32. The Roundup. Harkinson was gone. Doc Waters had got a permit for him in one of the finest hospitals in Watertown. He was stone blind. For a long time his eyes had been failing him, Doc said, and that steely glitter which had so many times made us believe he was a hypnotizer was only the change that was making his sight dimmer and dimmer, until at last the light went out altogether. Harkinson knew those last few days that he was going blind, and Jude, the fifth in line, told him only God could save him from being blind. And Harkinson, old, rough and ready Harkinson, began to pray night and day to God to save him from blindness. Harkinson, who hardly knew how to pray, began to pray. Oh, I'll never forget how I heard him calling to God that day, when we had him cornered in the log cabin. But Jude the Fifth had disappeared. Androfsky had disappeared. No longer could they dare to hang around our neighborhood. For when the split came between Long Tom and Harkinson, Jude the Fifth and Androfsky the Silent had stuck to Harkinson, along with 3 others. But the 3 others had let Harkinson in the lurch when they found he was going blind. No blind leader for them, no sir. They had run back to join Long Tom's bunch again. So had Androfsky. But when Jude came and told Androfsky that Harkinson had really gone blind and was left alone in the blockhouse, Androfsky had come to give his old side partner the last help he could give. And when he was sure that Harkinson would be taken care of, Androfsky had disappeared. So had Jude. No more did we see either of them, although Shadow Loomis looked for a long time for the Silent One to settle that long-standing quarrel that they had between them. But it seemed as though it should not be settled. Most of this we learned through Perry Stokes, who had gone with Doc Waters when they took Harkinson to the hospital. Perry had talked to Harkinson and had learned all these things from him. Harkinson was a different boy, said Perry. In that land of everlasting night, Harkinson lay back upon his pillow and thought about old times, times when he had his sight, and when he made every boy afraid to look him in the eye, when he had been the leader of a large number of redcoats and shared honors with Long Tom himself. But of the quarrel which caused the split up in the Red Runners, Harkinson never spoke. One thing, at least, you must say of Harkinson. He was true blue to his partners, and he never squealed. No matter what you might say about the Red Runners, you will have to admit that not a single one of them ever squealed on their gang. And then, one night, I'll never forget it, it was on January 27th, Doc Waters came for me. I was at home doing my lessons for the next day when Doc came. My mother opened the door for him. "If you won't mind, Mrs. Hawkins," he said, "I'd like to have the secretary go along with me tonight. I've got to take a run to Watertown." "Certainly, doctor," said my mother. "I like to have him go with you whenever you want him. I hope he will not make you too much trouble." "It's a pleasure, Mrs. Hawkins," said Doc. Doc always tried to say things like that so I would hear it. He was a great kidder. I'd rather have the secretary along with me than any boy in town. When I was seated beside Doc in his little machine and we were making 30 miles an hour on the road to Watertown, I said, "What's the idea? Why did you come for me?" "I got a request," he answered. "I was asked to bring you. Wait, you'll understand." Yeah, I understood. I seemed to know that he would take me to that hospital in which lay the fellow who one time was the only boy I was ever afraid to meet. Harkinson lay back upon a little white cot. "You! Is it you, Hawkins boy?" he asked, as I walked up to his bed. His voice sounded strange and low. His hand barely lifted. "It's me, Harkinson," I said, and I tried to make my voice sound friendly. "It's me, old-timer. I'm glad to see you." "I'm glad you come. They told me you would come. Sorry I can't see your old face, but it's all over, that is." "Wait." He dropped my hand and laid his own upon his forehead. I saw a look of pain pass over his pale face. What a change in that face, thought I. Once I had said Harkins's face was the hardest, toughest face I had ever seen. Now it was all changed. There was a softened look about his eyes. His lips seemed thin and pale. "They won't tell me the truth, Hawkins," he said. "They say I will get well and see again. But I know. I ain't long for this world no more. I'm going down a longer river than I ever paddled before, Hawkins, and I ain't going to wear no red coat no more. Feel here." He pulled my hand down and placed it on his breast. Under those coverlets I could feel the loud, fast thumping of his heart. It startled me. "Heart going too fast?" said Harkinson. "Can't stand it no longer without my eyes, you know. Gotta see or can't live, I won't be long." "Nonsense," I said. "You mustn't talk like that, Harkinson. Doc will see you through. It's going to take time, that's all." There was a grim smile upon his face, but he shook his head. "It's over," he said. "I know. I've called my redcoats for the last time, Hawkins. I only want to tell you yet that I am sorry for what I did to you. You've been a square and honest boy with me, and I treated you raw. I'm sorry for that. Before I go, I want to tell you. You believe me?" "You've never done anything to me, old-timer," I said, bending down. "You've been all right. It's all fair when you're fighting." "I used to think that," broke in the blind boy. "But no, it ain't so, Hawkins. You find that out when you get time to think about it. I've been thinking about it ever since the long night time came. And it's dark where I am. No daytime, no light. Hawkins." "But it won't be for long, Harkinson," I said. "Doc Waters will fix you up all right, buddy." "Just one thing," said Harkinson. "I want you to have something, Hawkins. I know I ain't gonna last. I want you to remember me always when I'm gone. Don't talk like that, Harkinson," I said. "You're gonna get well and see again in a little while. Don't you know good old Doc Waters can do things?" "He can't fix this heart of mine," said Harkinson, with a smile. "It's broke, beating faster than a woodpecker can peck, and harder than a sledgehammer. But here, Hawkins, this is for you to remember me by." He reached a weak hand under his pillow and pulled out the brass horn, the old relic of Stoner's boy. The old trumpet whose brassy notes had sounded a summons and a warning many a time around our old camping ground. "To remember me, Hawkins," he said. "I don't care who forgets, but you remember me always, will you?" I took the horn. "Yeah, I took it, but I could not thank him for it. I could not say a word. I had to turn away. Something about that poor old Harkinson lying there made tears come into my eyes, and I walked away and wiped my eyes on my sleeve. I stood there a long time, until Dot came tiptoeing over and said, "He is asleep. Come on, let's get back home." Our clubhouse still was watched by Long Tom's Red Runners. They didn't seem to mind Harkinson's misfortune. I don't think they cared one bit that he was not with them any more. Jerry Moore came in one night following, and told us that he had been caught by 2 of them, but that he had broken away from them. Another night Lou Hunter was playing the organ all alone in the clubhouse, and they had scared him at the windows. It was time to put a stop to it. So we held a council meeting in the clubhouse after school one day, and tried to figure out a plan to catch them. Nothing came of it, however. One plan after another was thrown aside because it wouldn't do. After the meeting broke up, I sat alone in my little office and thought it over. Suddenly, an idea came into my head. That evening, I had all my plans laid. I hurried down to the clubhouse right after supper. None of the boys had come yet. Presently, I heard voices outside. It was Lou Hunter and the preacher with whom he lived. They came in together. "Ah, Seckatary Hawkins," said the preacher, for he was a good friend of us boys. "I hope you have found it in your heart to forgive poor Harkinson." "Forgive him? For what?" I asked. "He's doing very poorly," said the preacher. "Dr. Waters had asked me to go up and console him a bit, and I'm on my way to Watertown right now. May I take a message of good cheer from you? It will do him much good to know it comes from you. The doctor tells me he speaks of you every day." "Tell him," I said, "tell him that Seckatary Hawkins wishes him all that is good, and hopes only that the daylight will soon come to him as it does to us. Every morning he will see the sunrise." "Ah, that is nice." "Nice," said the preacher. "Goodbye." We waited until his step died out in the snow. Then I said to Lou, "Did you take my message to the sheriff?" "Yes, everything is fixed. They are waiting now outside the second row of trees. They thought you were crazy to ask them to do it." "Oh, well, maybe I am," I said. "I ain't sure that it will do any good, but I've got a scheme. It might work." And I told the other boys to wait on the main road till they heard something. They asked me what that something would be so they would know, but I told them just as you ordered me. "That's right, Lou. They'll know well enough as soon as they hear it. Suppose you play a tune on the organ so that somebody knows we're here." Lou played, the same old thing he always played when you asked him to play what he liked. "Lead, kindly light, amid the encircling gloom." How it sounded to me then. Ah, boy. I heard it many times, played in the same way by that same Lou Hunter, and every time it seemed to mean something different to me. To me always it was a prayer to God Almighty to lead us the right way, no matter where we were bound for. A prayer to take us on and see us through. And what it meant for the Red Runners that night? "Lead, kindly light," rang for those Red Runners too that night. For I know that from that night on, 9 out of every 10 of those redcoats changed from their lawless ways to ways that would lead them on to better boys and better men when they grew up. Yeah, "Lead, kindly light" was the right song. Lou Hunter knew what he was playing. Like a flame on the tip of a candle which draws insects in the night, that song drew those Red Runners out from their hiding places. I could see out of the corner of my eye once in a while a face appear for a moment at this window, at that window, only to disappear again into the gloom. If I could only draw them inside as I planned. If they would only forget that Harkinson— "Now!" I said. "It's time, Lou. Stop the organ a minute." He snatched his fingers off the ivory keys. At the same time I whipped out of my pocket the old brass horn that Harkinson had given me, snatched it out and put it to my lips and blew 2 shrill blasts upon it. Then, as Lou Hunter ran to the door and threw it open wide, I blew once again 2 hearty calls. They came. Golly Moses, how they came! And if you think their crowd was made smaller by the split up between Harkinson and Long Tom, you're mistaken. They came in, I tell you, like a swarm of bees. They had been hanging around outside waiting for something to happen, and when they heard the call of that old brass horn, well, it was only a force of habit, you might say, but they trooped in. In a minute they had realized their blunder. Long Tom's voice reminded them that Harkinson and his horn no longer belonged to them, but it was too late. Long Tom screamed his orders, but what use? The sheriff and his deputies were on the porch. At every window there was no escape. "Long Tom," droned the sheriff, You and your friends will come with me." The Red Runners were rounded up. We had a little celebration in the clubhouse after they were taken away. All of our boys had heard the horn and knew that that was the something I had told them they would hear before they were to come to the clubhouse. As it was, they all arrived in time to see the sheriff and his men march the Red Gang away. "Stand up and shout 3 cheers for your old secretary," yelled Jerry Moore. They jumped to their feet and gave me the 3 loudest hurrahs I had ever heard. I laughed and bowed and held up the old brass horn. "Don't cheer for me," I said. "Give the credit to this old brass horn and to the old hypnotizer who gave it to me, Harkinson." "3 cheers for Harkinson," cried Jerry, but there were no cheers. No cheers. For he had no more than said that when the door opened and the preacher walked slowly into our meeting room. "Boys," he said in a low voice. Then he stopped and took off his hat and looked at the floor. For a minute he stood that way. Then he lifted his face and said, "He won't want cheers, rather your prayers. Harkinson, your friend Harkinson, died at 7 o'clock tonight." For a moment there was a silence in which you could have heard the breeze rustle in the evergreen cedars on the river path. The next instant every boy had snatched off his cap and bowed his head. I wondered then what was going through their minds. But I knew it was sorrow, sympathy for the old-time leader, regret that the old hypnotizer could not have lived to see the time when... but what's the use to talk about that? What's the use to say it might have been when it can't be? You asked me to write down here things that I can't figure out. I don't want to think of Harkinson passing out like that. God called him home. His eyes went blank and his heart swelled up and broke from worrying over it. Don't tell me. I felt like crying myself when the preacher said those soft-toned words. I sometimes sit in my little office and think about that. Wonder how it was that all of us boys who hated Harkinson as any boy can hate another boy felt so sad about his passing out of this life into the great dark land that some fellows, like the preacher, called the next world. But I can't figure it out. I know that the old brass horn will stay with me as long as I live, and that I will always think of it, and the boy who gave it to me, as among the dearest things I ever had to think about. "If you boys feel like you want to," the preacher was saying, "let us all kneel right here, in the little clubhouse where Harkinson so often stood, and pray for the repose of his soul." Which we did. End of chapter 32. End of The Red Runners by Seckatary Hawkins.